Hello everyone, my name is Peter, I'm the Dungeon Doctor, and welcome to this, the first viewing of my monk redesign for 5e, or another way of thinking of it is my interpretation of the monk class for the system that I'm designing. What I'm going to be showing you in this video is just the kind of first viewing of the mechanics I've designed for it. The original video I had planned for this was a comparison between my class and the original monk class and or the playtest version which recently came out in UA6. However, I feel like most people have had time to digest that Unearthed Arcana so far. Plenty of YouTubers have already covered the flaws in that system, and I don't want to cover old ground. Instead, I'm just going to focus on giving everyone the solution to, what would make a good monk class for the new edition of 5e. All of this is available on the fandom website where I'm uploading the playtest rules, or really the rules for the system that I'm developing for kind of like my answer to 5e's new edition, which was originally going under the name of 7e, hence the name 7e RPG. However, I'm starting to work more with the name of Freedom Fantasies for this now because, well, it's less connected to the D&D IP by, not using 5e, 7e moniker, and also it kind of leans more into what I think this final system is going to be. So anyway, without further ado, you're here to hear about my interpretation of the monk class. So, first thing to say, it is called the Warrior Archetype. If anyone saw my last video, I explained a bit more about that. And the reason it's called Warrior rather than Monk is twofold. Firstly, the new system I'm working on is essentially genre agnostic, so I wanted to move away from some of the original names of the classes in the 5e system. There's also another happy benefit to it, and that is by using the warrior name, it kind of takes a lot of the Asian mysticism out of the monk class. Not to say that there's not inspirations from kung fu and anime and the like in this class, however, it's not baked in, it's not hard-coded in the flavour. You can do what you want with this, and without any worry of sort of really being pigeonholed into this Asian stereotype that the class currently has. Anyway, let's keep moving on from there. So, other thing to mention is that everything here has been kind of adjusted to make it more 5e compatible. The core system I'm working on isn't fully 5e compatible, so on this website you will see differences between this class and the one on there. Mostly differences in the system accounting for that. Alright, so the Warrior is a genre agnostic redesign of the monk class featured in 5e. The following common complaints in the monk class are addressed by this redesign. So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you mostly what we've changed, although we'll get into the full detail as I go through the whole class. So firstly, Asian stereotypes coded into the monk class have either been removed, placing key with the word stamina. Incidentally, I prefer stamina to discipline. It just feels more accurate for a resource that you expend, whereas discipline doesn't really make sense that you run out of discipline, in my opinion. And also, I've broadened the scope of this class, so rather than it being very much inspired by Asian cinema, like wuxia, martial arts and the like, we can actually fill a lot of different traditional warrior aesthetics with this class. Flurry of Blows no longer requires a bonus action, and instead it triggers in response to an attack. This addresses confusion in how it is triggered in combination with bonus action attack granted by martial arts, and it reduces its competition with Step of the Wind and Patient Defense, which also have some tweaks to them. Additionally, you may spend stamina to make additional Flurry of Blows attacks at higher levels. Step of the Wind, no typo there, combines both the disengage and dash action. I know this is the same as what 1D&D currently is doing. Not plagiarism, because I actually published that idea on my website before the UA came out. So, not stealing from Watsy's book. If anything, there's the remotest chance that they might have stolen or copied my homework. But, who knows as to that? I know I'm not a big player by any means. All right, let's see. It may be, oh, here's the other detail. Step of the Wind may be used in place of an unarmed strike or a bonus action, which makes it distinct from how Cunning Action for rogues works, which is always this bonus action. I see the unarmed strike and being able to replace that with various activities as very much a sort of way of making the action economy of the monk or warrior dependent on their unarmed strikes. Let's see. Oh, I did mention it here, but patient defense works in the same way. You can use it as a bonus action or in place of an unarmed strike. Okay, deflect missiles. It deals potentially more damage now, as instead of it doing, one roll of your martial arts die plus wisdom, it does the damage that you reduced the attack by. So say you take a firebolt and you take 10 damage. If you reduce the full 10 damage, then that attack that you do is also going to do 10 damage. The exception is critical hits, where if you get a critical hit, you get to add an extra 2 martial arts die to the result. Also, it can deflect energy. That seems to be a very common homebrew, and really I've incorporated that into deflect missiles. I know 1D&D is doing something similar with deflect energy, although that is its own feature at very high levels. Okay. Low number of stamina points. Now, this in my system is addressed with the system. Short rests take just 10 minutes within that system, and there is also a cap on how many short rests you can take in a adventuring day. I limit it to 2 because it feels kind of reasonable with the number of encounters that an adventuring day should ideally have. And really, that's just a way to address what's happening with monks, fighters, and warlocks, and in my system, barbarians also are very short rest dependent. So, however, in this system, I've baked that 10-minute recovery of stamina points into the class itself, so it's not dependent on how the system works. Alright, also, I don't have any features that specifically grant additional ki. I know that's something that everyone really cries out for in the monk class. However, I feel like in addressing a lot of the other vulnerabilities of monk, we make them just generally less dependent on ki to function, and we give them plenty of other features that allow them just to kind of operate even when they don't have ki. So I'm not that worried about building those extra options in. The one thing I will say on key recovery is that that comes into their 20th level feature, which we'll get into later. The warrior is less dependent on their stamina to function in melee because they have access to armor, shields, and all weapons. So they're kind of taking a lot more from the fighter's book in how they function. Now, this is not kind of system independent, because I understand that WotC may not want to go for something like this in their build because they don't want to step on other classes' toes. The way I resolve this is I have fighter actually move away from the central warrior position and actually become a bit more vanilla in how they function. And I know that's a bit of a slur when it comes to character classes and the likes. However, I feel like having the fighter take on this kind of hero aesthetic that's kind of independent of warrior aesthetics, you open up this avenue for having a class which is very flavor agnostic, and by giving them lots and lots of feats and focusing on abilities which basically give them more actions or the ability to succeed at a range of activities, you create this kind of Build-A-Bear character class. And so I think that's kind of, in a way, how we fix monk. We kind of steal a bit of the fighter stuff and give fighter a slightly different identity, which is still, keeping a lot of what the fighter loves, but letting them do, something a bit different from just being a fighter. All right. Stunning Strike. Okay, we fixed that in a couple of ways. Firstly, Stunning Strike is now part of a feature called Targeted Strike, which allows you to do one of 3 things when you hit a creature. You can either attempt Stunning Strike, you can attempt to blind the target, or you can attempt to halt the target's movement. And those each require Constitution saving throw for Stunning Strike, as usual, Wisdom saving throw to prevent the blinded condition, and a Yeah, dexterity saving throw to prevent the movement being reduced to 0. The caveat with Stunning Strike is, and this is how we adjust some of the swinginess with it, is that if a creature has 100 hit points or more, they have advantage on their saving throw to prevent the stunned condition. If they have 50 hit points or less, they have disadvantage to prevent the saving throw. And this is good for addressing this idea of a monk, let's see, Stunning Strike just being really swingy and also being this kind of shutdown for the big boss monsters, which isn't terribly fun. Instead, it's now going to work a lot better on minions because you're going to be, often getting advantage on that, or at least a straight roll on that when you get to, higher levels. Or if you are against a boss monster, then you kind of have incentive for whittling down their hit points before attempting to land the Stunning Strike, creating a lot more strategy into how it's used. I'd like to kind of I've got a similar idea of how banishment works, and really it's very much taking a lot of the mechanical flavor of Pokemon and bringing it into D&D, in that, you can try and catch a Pokemon when it's at full health. It's not likely to work though, and the more you kind of work for getting yourself into position for using a Pokeball, or in our case using Stunning Strike or Banishment or something, then the more likely it is to work, and you get that kind of payoff for kind of going through the motions of a battle. Or the drama of a battle, I should say. Okay, lack of player agency in build choices has been addressed with the Warrior's Discipline feat, which allows players to create a character who focuses on agility, diplomacy, or resilience. I think we can actually disregard this top part of the feature because I address it a bit further later on. I adjusted Warrior's Discipline before I deleted that text and actually added another option. So we've actually got 4 ways to specialize our monk. And this addresses the fact that monk gets pulled in many different directions. I think it was my first video I released on YouTube where I talked about how the monk is spread very thin. To quote The Hobbit, like butter spread across too much bread. Actually, no, that's Fellowship of the Ring, because Bilbo's very old when he says that. Okay, carrying on though, because they're trying to fill this defensive role, control role, attack role, mobility role, and they get pulled in so many different directions that they aren't able to fill any one of those roles really well. They've got no way to specialize. And I address that by giving them a feature which lets them choose which of these kind of monk disciplines, or warrior disciplines as the feature is called, that they want to specialize in. And so our options for that are Uncanny Agility, which takes a lot of that original, very monk-like flavor and is going to keep that and retain that within the class if people want that. So that's going to give you like your ability to run up waterfalls, and it's going to give you some additional features. It also is where we incorporate the slow fall feature as well. Rather than have that baked into all varieties of monk, it's a bit situational. It also gives monks the ability to take the disengage action by sacrificing an unarmed strike or by using a bonus action, which is letting them fill that skirmisher role that monk really wants to do, and they usually have to take the mobile feat in order to do it. Then we've also got Precision, which is a way of letting the monk or warrior do more damage. Increases their damage by a roll of their martial arts die once per turn, and also makes their attacks more accurate. Also, it gives them the option to use heavy weapons as part of their martial arts. And so suddenly for a while, I was thinking that this heavy weapon using monk or warrior might be introduced as a subclass, like with the Kensei. However, it's such a popular archetype that I felt like if we've got a damage-focused monk, then we really need them to have the heavy weapons. And so we've got that option. Resilience for defense. Now, this is a really cool one. For a while, I was playing with the idea of monk or warrior having a d10 hit dice, and I thought, it doesn't work for all flavors of monk, and so I decided that I'll bake this into one of the options, and that is resilience. So For every level of monk, you get an additional hit point with that feature, taking you essentially to a D10 in terms of your hit points. And it also, when you use patient defense, it gives you a resistance to piercing, bludgeoning, and slashing damage, kind of like a short-term rage in how they work, and really lets you lean into the aesthetic of this monk who is able to endure a lot of physical harm. And that carries through in some of the later features that resilience gets you. And then we've got diplomacy, and this was an interesting one. Monk is really bereft of any social encounter features, and if you're in a socially orientated roleplay experience, Monk is going to suffer. The only feature they had, and this came in at like 13th level, I think, or somewhere around there, was Tongue of Sun and Moon, and that let them talk to any creature and understand any creature. That feature is kind of incorporated into diplomacy, made a bit less fantastical in how it works, because instead of it being you just understand and anyone can understand you, it's more of a you are able to intuitively understand creatures and kind of communicate your ideas to them and get the kind of gist and simple idea of what they're telling you. You're just very good at reading body language, and you're just generally very good at languages. Also, it gives the monk warrior a number of features associated with improving their charisma checks. So they get a choice of 2 skills, be it insight, persuasion, or intimidation. And when they use any of those skills, they can add a roll of their martial arts die to the result of the check. No key point expenditure. I was playing with the idea of key point expenditure on that, and it didn't quite feel appropriate for them. And they get some other features associated with it. Okay, there we go. Let's actually run through it, because there's a few more details in this I want to get through. All right, the disciplined warrior. The warrior represents characters in fiction who are defined by their pursuit of martial prowess or bodily improvement. And this, that's something that's familiar from all kinds of warrior cultures in history. So they include warriors from a range of settings and backgrounds, from the Spartan warriors of ancient Greece and knights of medieval Europe to the martial artists of Eastern cultures. So we do still keep that flavor in there. The warrior gains access to more stamina than the other archetypes. That's something that's system dependent. I'd probably have to remove that in the finished version of this. And it uses a resource, and they use the stamina resource to fuel physical feats of prowess, which often exceed the normal capabilities of people. They also demonstrate remarkable mental discipline and mobility, which they use to their advantage in combat. Okay, that's our flavor setup. Let's see what we get. We get D8 hit points per each level of warrior we have, and we get a 8 plus your constitution modifier at the start. And thereafter you get a D8 or 5 plus your constitution modifier kind of warrior class should have and have the ability to use. There are some minor restrictions on shield use, but otherwise you can use light armor or medium armor just fine. As for weapons, you get simple weapons and martial weapons. There's a minor restriction on which weapons you can use, which you can get out of, depending on which warrior discipline you go for. Choose one artisan's tool, that's just the same. Saving throws, you get strength and dexterity. And for skills, I actually made this more flexible. I don't feel like the warrior should be that locked into which classes, which skills they go for, and you do get the option to specialize in the more social ones a bit later as well. I wanted to keep that very open and really broaden the scope of what it means to be a warrior. Styling equipment, this is pretty much the same as what is granted to, I think it's the ranger and or the fighter. So you can pick up scale mail or leather, and they get a short bow rather than a long bow because one of their restrictions is against heavy weapons, and otherwise they get either a martial weapon and a shield or 2 martial weapons. Okay, that's pretty much there. Now there's a couple of things in this archetype feature table which aren't quite accurate, but for the most part this is fine. I think one of the things that isn't there anymore is this inexhaustible feature mentioned at 15th level. Rather than look at this, let's just run through the classes themselves. So stamina. You gain 1 stamina point which you can spend in order to use powerful physical features such as Flurry of Blows. You may spend 10 minutes to rest and recuperate in order to recover all your stamina points. You may rest in this way as part of a short rest. And you may recover stamina in this way twice, regaining all uses when you finish a long rest. Okay, this is because when you reduce the time for recovering resources, you can potentially get into this situation where someone could maybe throw up a wall of force and just let you rest for 10 minutes within that before releasing you again at full power. And also, it kind of discourages the idea of always relying on a short rest in long adventuring days. You know, it has to mean something when you take that. And I think that's something that should be baked into the system in general, because otherwise you get into weird coffee lock situations. Okay, and then for each level of warrior you have, you gain an additional stamina point. Just the same as key points. All right, this is replacing part of the martial arts feature, and it is called finesse, and this is really cool. All right, you may treat your unarmed strikes and any melee or thrown weapons which lack the heavy property as having the finesse property, allowing to use either your strength or your dexterity modifier to determine bonuses to attack and damage rolls made with them. You may choose to roll your martial die in place of the weapon's usual damage for any attack you make with a finesse weapon, including your unarmed strikes. Okay, that's pretty much the same as what martial arts used to do, except there's no simple weapon restriction. The only restriction is heavy weapons, and we can move away from that if we choose a particular type of monk. The other thing to mention is, I know a lot of people are sad about the fact that monks aren't able to use dexterity as part of their grapples. I think rather than get into this situation where it's a bit incongruous and you are trying to justify using dexterity to grapple someone, I would rather just see the idea of a strength-based monk be made a bit more possible. And a lot of this class seeks to kind of address that by giving access to medium armor and shields, for example, making you less reliant on dexterity. So if you did want to go for that kind of more grappler-based monk, which is relying more on strength than dexterity, I feel like that is possible in this class. Intuitive defense, minor change from unarmed defense because you don't have to be unarmored to use it. And that is, while you are not wearing heavy armor, your minimum armor class can be determined as follows, just same as unarmored defense. And just like barbarians, you have the option to use a shield with that armor. Now, that is very powerful because that means that you can easily get to an 18 armor class from very low levels. There is a reason why you wouldn't want to add a shield, and that is introduced in the martial arts feature. When you take the attack action and are not wearing a shield, you may make an unarmed strike as a bonus action. So basically you're trading either damage or a +2 to your armor class for that. And that feels consistent with how generally shields work within the 5e system. It's not terribly balanced to let you have a shield and then let you have an extra attack. Flurry of Blows. The difference here is that after you make an attack with a weapon or unarmed strike, you may expend 1 stamina point to make an additional unarmed strike this turn. And that is just an additional one, and it's also not restricted to your turn. If you have an opportunity attack and you make a Flurry of Blows attack, you can spend a key point, stamina point, to make that a 1-2 punch on someone that's trying to retreat away from you. So super fun, and it doesn't take your bonus action, which is something that the monk class did really suffer from. Okay, anything else? Martial die. I call it martial die rather than martial arts die. This wasn't a deliberate move to get away from the martial arts aesthetic, although I think that's kind of helpful. This is more because martial die is a common die resource that is shared between the warrior or monk. It's also shared with my kind of fighter interpretation, which is a hero. It's shared with the barbarian, which I call a brute in my system. And also it is shared with a new class I've developed called the tactician. And so, you know, that scales in the same way between all those classes. And if you multi-class from warrior into one of these other classes and get to level 5 or also level 11 or 17, you get a boost to this martial die. And this gives you that incentive for particularly going to like level 5, where normally you'd get extra attack and you don't really get a benefit for getting that. This gives you that, though, benefit for choosing to multi-class within your kind of role within the party. Warrior save DC, this is all the same as what we see for Monk. And the one feature that is kind of missing from this redesign is, I would say, weapon mastery. And that's because it's not in a copyright format that I would be able to release in any way. And if at some point WotC do release the weapon mastery under something like an open license, big if there, I think, then that's something potentially I could incorporate into an updated version of this that is fully compatible with, I'll call it 5.5 edition. But until then, no weapon masteries. Assume this would have weapon mastery if we were in a system that allowed that. Okay, and if we did have weapon mastery, then we would be using any weapons, and you'd get 2, just like the base monk in 1D&D. Okay, level 2, patient defense. You may spend 1 stamina point to take the dodge action as a bonus action, or instead of an unarmed strike on your turn. Let's see, and then step of the wind, the same mechanics, and because I published this before WotC, I feel happy keeping this in here. When you use this feature, you also gain the benefits of the disengage action. Always felt bad that you weren't getting more bang for your buck with that. You may notice there's no double jump distance incorporated into that, and that's because that is in a particular branch of Monk. Speaking of Warrior's Discipline, you gain one of the following benefits from your Warrior's Discipline: Diplomacy, Precision, Resilience, or Uncanny Agility. So these are kind of 4 pathways on how to be a monk, and you gain additional benefits from your Warrior's Discipline as you gain levels in this archetype. It's kind of like a subclass baked into the monk class in a way. I don't feel bad about that as well. I mean, if you think about how Warlock is so customizable in their approach, this feels like it makes sense as something that can be in a class. All right. Diplomacy. You gain 2 of the following skills: Insight, Persuasion, or Intimidation, and you learn 2 languages of your choice. And this is something I always bake into my classes, and that is, if you already have 2 or more of the above skills, you may choose 2 other skills of your choice. So that's giving you that flexibility that, if you've already chosen those features and now you get to this level, certainly you get to, still have the benefits of those 2 extra skills. And then here's the nice bit that's going to boost all the monks' social encounters, and that is when you make a skill check using Insight, Persuasion, or Intimidation, you may add 1 roll of your martial die to the result. A lot of people may ask why I didn't just make it all wisdom based to kind of align with what monks are like. And the tricky thing is that a DM may or may not already choose to let you make certain checks with a flexible ability modifier like that. And so it can be a bit tricky to bake that into a class in a way that accounts for tables that do or don't do that already in a way that's balanced. So rather than get into that issue, we just say add your martial die, and it gives you some nice incentive for continuing in the class. All right, precision. You may use the finesse feature with heavy weapons. Really basic. Certainly you can use dexterity with your glaives, your great swords, your pikes, whatever you want. Really opens up the kind of monk that you can have. And then once per turn, you may add 1 additional roll of your martial die to the damage caused by a weapon attack or unarmed strike. At this level, that's just a d4 added on. So that's not that bad. And as you get into higher levels, it goes up more and more. Oh yeah, that reminds me. We start at a d4 rather than a d6. I understand why people might balk at that, but I feel like it makes a lot of sense for the monk to start with a low die on that and feel that progression from a weak die to a high die, and more focus on the kind of journey to getting to higher die sizes. The other thing I will say that is in a subclass I'm developing for this, when you reach level 3, you can get this feature that bumps your martial die to a d6 rather than remain at a d4. So there are ways to kind of address that in a way that kind of keeps up with the new monk. All right, then we got resilience. Your hit point maximum is increased by 2, and it increases by 1 for each additional level of warrior you have. So that's essentially making you a d10 hit die rather than a d8. And then we get that mini barbarian feature when you use patient defense, you gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage until the start of your next turn. Makes you nice and resilient, and suddenly you are this monk who does remain in the front lines as needed. Okay, uncanny agility. You are able to fall safely from great heights, provided you are not incapacitated. You take no damage when you fall, and you land safely on your feet. I don't like the tracking and the mathematics that's involved in original Slowfall, and for all intents and purposes, you were never really being put at risk of falling that far that you took damage usually. In this, we just smooth that over, make the whole feature a lot simpler. You just don't take that damage. You're a cat, you always land on your feet no matter how high you are. Also, some races, species, or I call them ancestries, just have flight or gliding. So, no damage on Slowfall makes sense. Also, Featherfall is a first level spell. This is not overpowered. Okay, your maximum jump distances, both vertical and horizontal, are doubled. So that's just always on, doesn't matter about Step of the Wind, and it feels like a feature that should come under the uncanny agility sort of aspects of a monk. And the last bit is that bit that makes you more of a skirmisher. You can take the disengage action as a bonus action or instead of an unarmed strike you make on your turn. There we go. And then the last one is, there's no other warrior's disciplines. This is just addressing your unarmored movement, which I call swift movement, because you can do it in armor, just not heavy armor. And so your movement speed is increased by 10 feet, and you gain additional increases to your movement speeds at those levels. Okay. Subclass choice, level 3, that's the same. Deflect missiles, that's all pretty much the same, except it's any ranged attack, and as I mentioned before, you can just deal the damage that is reduced, which can get pretty big since your warrior level is incorporated into that damage reduction, so maximum of like 30 or so. Oh, and the damage is also reduced by 2 rolls of your martial die, not just one. So I take out the dexterity dependency in here because this warrior is less dependent on dexterity. It could be a strength monk or strength warrior, and so that's why you're getting 2 rolls of your martial die instead of your dexterity added in there. Okay. It all works roughly the same. Ability score increase or feat, that's pretty much the same. Improved martial dice, that's your martial arts die scaling as usual. Extra attack, as normal. Targeted strike, so this is what I mentioned earlier, blind. So use a stamina point, and if they fail wisdom saving throw, they're blinded. Got that nice ability to target potentially a weak saving throw on something. Slow, just the same, you can target dexterity. Again, that could be a weaker saving throw, and now its movement is reduced to 0. And then we got the stunned condition, and the swinginess of that is helped by make it dependent on how many hit points the character has. So advantage if they have 100 or more hit points, and disadvantage if it has 50 hit points or less. Wonderful. And then if it's somewhere between, it's just as normal and works as kind of the original one did. Next, at level 6, we've got Deadly Precision. The damage caused by your weapon attacks and unarmed strikes ignores resistance and immunity to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. I like the idea of this warrior who's just able to find the faults in something that would normally be immune to such things. It's also taking that kind of feature from the way of the Kensei, where they can do that with any weapons, and baking that into the class itself, because it just feels like you shouldn't always be locked into unarmed strikes. You should have that ability to, use any sort of weapon flavor that you're going for with this class. Also, in the long term, if the class was going into something that had masteries, then it makes all weapons and unarmed strikes viable for them. All right, level 7, you get evasion. No changes there. Resilient Mind, this replaces, I forget the name, Stillness of Mind. Oh, it sounds very similar. There we go. And just says, you gain proficiency in wisdom saving throws. Nothing else to it. You're a monk or warrior, and you're specializing in wisdom. You should definitely have that proficiency, at least at some point. and it gets around a lot of the weirdness of actions, reactions, or whatever for preventing Charmed and Frightened if you just succeed on the saving throw to begin with. Just feels right for the class. And we get this feature, which is a little hidden way up here. Improved Flurry of Blows. Now you may use Flurry of Blows feature up to twice per turn. So welcome boost to kind of your spiky damage. This would let you do up to, let's see, extra attack is 2, bonus action attack is 3, and then an extra 2 Flurry of Blows. Now that you do up to 5 attacks per turn. They're all, the additional ones are unarmed strikes, so it's not super powerful in what you can do with them, and it does expend your resources pretty quickly if you do that. So this is level 7 always feels like a bit of a really lackluster level for monks, actually, because the features are usually very passive, and this is a much more active ability. And yeah, if you're in those adventuring days where you don't do many encounters, then suddenly your monk's looking a lot better, because you do have that opportunity to do the big spiky damage that spellcasters can do by expending all their spell slots in one round, or one encounter days. Right, level 8, that's as normal. Level 9, improved Warrior's Discipline. So it's been 7 levels. Let's see what you get with your specialisms. Diplomacy. This is taking some of those ideas from Stillness of Mind and baking into the class, or into an path for your monk. You gain immunity to Charmed and Frightened conditions. This kind of gets into the more cerebral aspects of a monk or warrior. Now we've got the parts that were kind of baked into Tongue of Sun and Moon, and that is that you can understand all forms of spoken or gesture-based languages. Not all language is verbal, to a limited degree, and you can clearly communicate your intentions to creatures who can speak a language but do not share a language with you. So, as long as it's not an unintelligent creature, you can get the gist of what you mean to them. So it's nice for roleplay, I think this is, and gives you an opportunity to sort of communicate in very simple ways. A lot of fun. And this is something that I originally had in a subclass feature I developed a long time ago. This is, while you are within 10 feet of a creature, you have advantage on insight checks to determine their emotional state or whether they are being truthful or not. So this is that kind of lie detector monk. Like, you're so perceptive, you can detect someone's heartbeat, as well as the other bodily functions, just to tell if they're lying or not. Super fun flavor, and just a big boost to that role-playing aspect of a monk, I think. Alright. Precision. When you miss with a weapon attack or unarmed strike, you may as a reaction add 1 roll of your martial die to the result of the attack, potentially turning the miss into it. Now, it does use your reaction, so you are limited in how often you can use this, and then, if you're using a reaction, suddenly you aren't sort of holding down a position against an enemy, and you can't make your reaction attacks, etc. But, if you really want to get that hit and want to expend that bit of action economy to get the attack on someone, then you can. And so just a nice additional increase to your overall damage. And it really fits the idea of a monk never missing as well. They should be nice and targeted, disciplined, and just able to call on that in order to get a more reliable hit. Resilience. This is where we're introducing some of those level 10 features, so immunity to diseases, poison damage, and immunity to both the poisoned and stunned condition. So you're kind of anti-monk in a way that you can resist that stunned condition that could be put on you, and you're still keeping that immunity to poison damage because it's a option. And if you're going for an option, I don't think it makes sense for it just to be resistance. I think having full immunity to poison damage isn't that far-fetched. And, most creatures aren't doing exclusively poison damage. If they are, then you get a fun encounter. Alright, Uncanny Agility, this is our last Warrior's Discipline. You may add 1 roll of your martial die to the result of any initiative checks you make. Big boost to your initiatives, and it will combine with other initiative checks, such as from proficiency bonus. And yeah, it really leans into the idea that a monk can go very quickly in combat, and so I bake it into the more dexterity focused ones. Alright, then the rest of this is pretty much the same as what you had for running up waterfalls, except it requires you take the dash action. These benefits don't just last until the end of your turn, so you don't sort of get to the end of your turn walking along walls or up waterfalls, etc., and then fall. Instead, if you take the dash action on the first turn, run along a wall or even along a ceiling I have on my iteration, and then you don't fall until the start of your next turn, but you can prevent yourself falling by using the dash action again on that turn, so you can just keep continuing that benefit as you go. So it's actually more powerful, but also a little more restricted in how it works to kind of account for the fact that you can just keep doing it turn after turn. So a bit of a balancing act there needed. Level 10, this is specifically to address how all all martial classes tend to be very multiple ability score dependent and very feat hungry, and that is just to give them an ability score increase at level 10. I do this for all the martials, so it's a bit kind of a flat benefit across all of those. And there's another benefit they get at level 12 associated with that. Monks will be very happy for that, and gives them a real drive to get to these levels as well, rather than starting to dip out into spellcasting. Alright, Resilient Body. So like Resilient Mind, you're gaining a proficiency saving throw, and this is taking some of the power of Diamond Soul away, which you do still gain, by kind of distributing those saving throws at earlier levels. So it kind of balances that power curve rather than making it just this big spike that you get at level 14. And it also makes sense for warriors to get Constitution saving throws at least at some point. Okay, level 11, let's see, improved martial die, yes. Improved flurry of blows, okay, you're level 11. Spellcasters are casting, is it 5th level spells now, I think. So yeah, being able to attack up to 6 times per turn, I think it is at this point. Yeah, as long as you spend enough key points on it, or stamina points, makes a lot of sense. And this is also where you get your subclass features, which, that should say level 11 rather than level 10. Oh well. Level 12, legendary abilities. This is another feature common to all the martial classes, and that is that unlike the spellcasters, they get the ability to go beyond plus ultra and start going beyond just ability scores of 20. I feel like it makes sense because in the level 12 to 20 regions, I think suspense of disbelief is out of the window, and so enabling your fighters, your barbarians and monks to go even further and go beyond the usual limits and get into supernatural limits makes sense to me. And so that is why they're able to start at this point putting those ability score increases into going higher. And by this point, they are pretty much just getting ability score increases anyway. I would say this is also partly why I give them an ability score increase at level 10, because that helps get them to this point where this could be a viable ability as well. Level 13, Resilient Soul. This is Diamond Soul. Basically, at this point, you're just getting your charisma and intelligence saving throws, so not a huge benefit there, but then you do get that ability to reroll checks if you spend a stamina point. Okay, level 14. This is our last feature for Warrior's Discipline. Firstly, we get Diplomacy, so now you can extend that immunity essentially to Charmed and Frightened to other characters as a bonus action, or in place of an unarmed strike, which is a common feature for the warrior, they can end the Charmed or Frightened condition on a character of their choice within 30 feet of you. So lovely stuff you get. Extend that, you really kind of take on this leadership role in that way, and a little bit of paladin flavour in a way there. However, they can also turn that table and say, alternatively as a bonus action or in place of an unarmed strike, you can impose the Charmed or Frightened condition on another creature. It's limited in that if they succeed on their saving throw, they're immune to it for 24 hours, but otherwise it doesn't cost any of your stamina. Precision. Once per turn, you may use your Flurry of Blows feature without expending a stamina point. A little bit weaker, however, in a class which is letting you have more and more Flurry of Blows, I felt like having just the ability to have that one extra Flurry of Blows without spending a stamina point made a lot of sense. Continues to lean into the power aspects of the monk, of this monk anyway. Resilience. When you use Patient Defense, you gain resistance to all damage types until the start of your next turn. This is taking the parts of empty body that gave you immunity to, resistance to damages, and baking it into this more resilient monk archetype. Uncanny agility. When you use your Step of the Wind feature, you gain a flying speed equal to your movement speed. I felt like that was pretty much the end point of what this wuxia and, in my opinion, Dragon Ball Z inspired monk should get. And the ability to get flying irrespective of kind of what subclass you're going into made a lot of sense if you're kind of following that kind of arc of what a lot of those monks were trying to portray. So wonderful stuff. I really like it. It is limited to when you use the Step of the Wind feature, which means you're spending a stamina point each turn to keep up that flying speed. And just like with the wall climbing feature, you keep the flying speed provided you keep using Step of the Wind. However, the other thing with this is when you get to level 20, you get to regain a stamina point at the start of each of your turns. So at that point, it's Indefinite Flight anyway. Level 15, Blinding Speed. So this is taking another part of empty body and baking into the class. It comes a lot earlier at level 15, and that is when you use Step of the Wind or Patient Defense, you can choose to become invisible. That invisibility lasts until the end of your next turn, whereupon you may immediately use Patient Defense or Step of the Wind to remain invisible without interruption. So it's a turn-by-turn invisibility that you can extend and get to keep going as long as you've got a key or stamina. The disadvantage to it is, though, if your movement speed is reduced to 0, you lose that invisibility, and that's to reflect the fact that you're kind of moving like faster than eyes can keep up with. Again, very Dragon Ball Z inspired, but blinding speed feels like a much more common trope to happen between different interpretations of monk. So yeah, really, really like how that's come out. Ability score increase. Again, you can take your ability scores higher than 20 than that. Improve martial die, you're up to D10 now, and you can use Flurry of Blows up to 3 times per turn. I think this is the point where Drunken Master is able to make like 5 attacks with Flurry of Blows, albeit on lots of different targets. The feature would need, Drunken Master would need to be adapted to work with this interpretation of monk, but otherwise, this is something that pretty much works for everyone. Okay, and you get your subclass. Level 18, Immortality, you decide what rate your body ages. I think that's how the Druid class interprets it. And also you no longer need food or water to live. Definitely feels like that needs to be a very high level feature because it's very out there. And then instead of Astral Self, I called it Soul Projection, but now I've forgotten what it's called. Astral Projection, you gain a different 9th level spell, one which is less spiritually inclined and a bit less kind of fitting into that specific interpretation of monk, and that is Foresight spell. And basically you've got perfect focus, you spend 8 stamina points and you get this Foresight spell. Really, really cool, and it's the kind of thing that you'd want at this level. And it does take an action to do it as well, rather than a whole minute. However, 8 stamina points, it's a bit of a burn. Alright, level 19, that is as normal. Also, level 17 is when Wizard gets Wish. So, letting you cast Foresight on yourself feels fine and appropriate. Okay, level 20, Boundless Stamina. Now we're addressing that stamina usage of a lot of your features by just letting you regain it at the start of each of your turns. You always regain at least 1, provided you're not incapacitated. Suddenly you're able to use all these very stamina point hungry features turn after turn. And then, I don't know why 1D&D felt the need to take epic improvements out, or epic feats out. I decided to keep them as just something that any class or multi-class can get at level 20, and you have the option of taking the +2 or gaining an epic feat with that. And also that +2 can take any ability score above a 20. But yeah, monks could do that already, or warriors anyway. Okay, that is it. I've gone long enough. Hope you enjoyed it. Please do let me know in the comments what you think of this. This is the first viewing, so there's still typos and minor edits to make here, but this is definitely drawing towards what I would call a finished version. One thing to point out as well, this is all copyrighted under the Creative Commons by Attribution 4 license, so feel free to use this in your own brews, but please do give attribution. Not that I could necessarily have the resources to follow this up, but please do like it, share it with attribution, and if anyone wants to let Watsy know about this, make sure you credit me. All right, thanks everyone, and have a great day.